All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I am joined on this lovely Sunday night, late night episode
Late night.
by, by Thomas Jared Farmer. Oh, I'm getting that weird reverb thing again.
I don't know, man. It's not me.
Uh, it's on my end. My bad. All right. That should be good. So, yeah, we're going to talk today about something that was brought to my attention by a student of mine. So how this went is I was talking with a student. We just had finals this past week. Um, essays were due. Final essays were due. And I was talking with the student because he had an unrelated question about something else that was happening. And he said, I have a English final that's due in a few hours. And I said, well, let me let you go. Don't you need to go work on that? And he said, no, I'll just run it through the AI generator. And I was like, come again? Run it through the what
That's
now?
a what an admission.
Now, this student in particular, who has remained anonymous, is very open and honest with me about these sorts of things. And so, yeah, he was like, "Oh yeah, there's this AI generator that will write your essays," and I was like, "Okay, like, is it any good?" And he pulled it up and showed it to me, and he's like, "Well, it must be okay because I've been getting credit for it for the past like 2 weeks." Right? So this sparked a whole conversation at our school, and some people shared some resources with me. So what we're going to be talking about today is AI and the humanities. Specifically, OpenAI released a few weeks ago. I think it was mid to late November. Their Chat GPT, which is a program. It can do a lot of things, but one of the things that it does fairly well is that it can basically write a essay for you on just about anything. Um, and the reason why that's problematic for the humanities, we'll unpack a little bit later. But um, we're going to focus on that. But first, before I ask my question, Jared, tell everybody who you are, what you do, that sort of thing.
All right. Well, apologies for anyone who's seen this before and has had to hear me do this before, but I'm Thomas Jared Farmer. I PhD student, University of Munster, philosophy, religion. I have degrees from other places. Is that is that sufficient?
That's sufficient. If you want the full introduction, go read the other stuff. Um, so lots I want to unpack here. Um, to start off with, though, where do we want to start? There's a couple of essays, kind of more so opinion pieces that have been released over the past few weeks. One of which, with the provocative title that kind of inspired the title for this live stream tonight, is an essay by Daniel Herman called "The End of High School English." Um, there's another closely related essay by Stephen Mark called "The College Essay is Dead." Both of which are talking about the potential impact of this new chat PT, GPT, GPT. I keep forgetting that. So, first of all, let's start off by talking about potentially how this is not a problem and how this is a problem. So, practically, well, let me back up a little bit. First and foremost, um, I don't know, which one do you want to start with? How is a problem practically speaking, or why would it really be a problem for like high level philosophy?
Well, I think that let's start with the apocalyptic tech, right? Because I think that that's what's going to be generating most of the discussion, and there will be a lot of hand wringing about this sorts of things amongst teachers.
Mm,
So I think that we should probably start with addressing that, like what's negative about this,
yeah.
before we take a look at some of the potential ups to this. So, you teach high school level students, you've taught college. So,
Mhm.
what do you take away as the problematics?
Yeah. No.
Obviously plagiarism. I mean, because this is
Right.
submitting work. It's so at an ethical level, I mean, it's dishonest, right? You're submitting
Yeah.
work that isn't yours. So I think that ethically we can say it's questionable at best,
Yeah.
but it's no more questionable than students copying and pasting from
Yeah.
like the Stanford's website, right? Because I've had that before.
Oh, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
you can reverse engineer. You can reverse engineer a student's paper and say, well, this has been a mediocre student all semester, and they turned in something which is clearly above their level. So how did they get here? And then
Right.
it doesn't take too many Google searches to figure out where
Right.
they gleaned it from.
So let's start. Let me start off on a very practical level, and I want to read a sentence or two from Stephen March. The college essay is dead. So on a practical level, I think this is a major concern for middle school, high school, and intro to college level, like basic curriculum, college level classes. Um, this is what Stephen says. The essay, in particular, the undergraduate essay, has been the center of humanistic pedagogy for generations. It is the way we teach children how to research, think, and write. That entire tradition is about to be disrupted from the ground up. Kevin Bryan, an associate professor at the University of Toronto, tweeted in astonishment about OpenAI's new chatbot last week. "Quote: um, you can no longer give take-home exams/homework, even on specific questions that involve combining knowledge across domains." So, on a very practical level, the biggest impact, and I've actually already had meetings about this with the college or with the high school administration at the school that I work at. On a practical level, the biggest impact is going to be that for the past in the United States, since United States academic institutions have been a thing, the way that teachers assess learning in the humanities specifically is the essay. So I think that's where we should start.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
it's a better bellwether for determining intelligence and the one's grasp of the specific subject matter than test ever has been.
Mhm.
Um, Tests um, they convey a certain amount of information gathering skills, but really what's being measured in terms of the humanities in particular is your ability to kind of weave together a coherent narrative to demonstrate an understanding of the material. Um, and if a bot can do that, um, then you know it removes that assessment capacity. So there is some concern for the way that, again, the humanities has been traditionally taught, but not just the humanities. I mean, you have to write papers for
Yeah,
all sorts
everything.
of things.
Yeah.
Um, Now, you could argue that it was never fair that we, assessed intelligence based on writing, because to what degree is intelligence reflected in writing? And you could say, well, we have perhaps for too long relied on writing as a demonstration of intelligence when in point of fact there's all sorts of intelligence which does not communicate well in writing. And so maybe it's for the best. There are students that test well, there are students that write well, there are students that can present oral arguments much better than they can coherently weave together narrative and writing. So we have privileged a certain sort of intelligence, particularly in the
Right.
humanities. Um, and maybe this creates a avenue for us to reevaluate that, or maybe it is as apocalyptic as everyone says. Who knows?
Yeah. So there's kind of two aspects to this that I've been grappling with. So I had a very extensive and detailed conversation with several curriculum designers before I left on our winter holiday, winter break holiday. I sound like I'm British. And this was one of the things, like, so the two parts of this. On the one hand, I think we could see this as a sort of tool. So there's a lot of analogies being drawn. One analogy that's being drawn is to the calculator, right? So,
Mhm.
Jared, I don't know if you had this experience, but when I was in, I think it was your second or third grade, I was taught like long division, right? How to do it out by hand. And I remember being told in middle school, like it's a meme now, but teachers actually said it, like we weren't allowed to use calculators for math test, and the meme, well, you're not always going to have a calculator in your pocket, right? Well, it turns out that that was a stupid statement. Right?
Yeah.
um, so one of the analogies that I've heard drawn here is between the calculator, right? The same thing that happened with mathematics education, with the introduction of the calculator, and the calculator being made readily available to basically anyone and everyone, of regardless of economic status, across the board, schools that had funding, schools that didn't have funding. That the same thing is going to happen to the humanities, and like you said, everybody writes essays. It's not just English,
Yeah.
philosophy, history. It's also all of the STEM subjects. So the same thing is going to happen there. Um, is going to happen there. And so, on the one hand, the idea is that we use this as a tool, right? That maybe the most optimistic version I've heard. So I'm gonna go most optimistic, and then why it's problematic. Most optimistic version I've heard is that we can use this as a tool for writing, and that maybe we don't have to teach things like rudimentary punctuation, sentence structure. That this tool will kind of level out the playing field in that regard, and will allow students to then use that as like a leaping board to write more detailed analysis in their essay. My pushback against that, and then I'll let you talk. My pushback against that is that it's going to be used as a tool, that it's going to most directly impact the, for lack of a better word, and no offense to any of my students that happen to come across this, I know y'all don't watch my stuff anyway, but it's going to impact those students who aren't quote unquote high achieving. That it's
Yeah.
going to most impact the students at the bottom, and the students at the bottom are going to use this not as a learning tool, but as just
Crutch.
the work itself, right? And
Yeah.
then not actually learn anything, right?
Yes. Well, you could just as well say that about anything, right? Low
Yeah,
achieving students aren't going to be achieving academically anyway, right? I think, and again, that's not, it's not really a criticism, because, academics isn't for everyone. Not academics in the way, like, writing an essay is a skill.
right.
It's a very specific skill, but it's kind of like teaching calligraphy, right? It's useful for a particular set of individuals. Maybe it's not um, the universal skill that everyone thinks it should be. Because again, it privileges a certain kind of intelligence. Um, Now, I say this as someone who has put many, many years in developing this skill. but I'm just not convinced that it should be the universal marker of intelligence.
Right.
And what I find interesting about all of this is even though writing is a skill which is treated is universal across the board, no one acted as though, or at least, maybe it's just retrospective. Maybe I wasn't there, so I was going to say, no one is saying that this is the death of science journals,
Right.
right? There's this collective thing in our culture now, and there are reasons for it, but everyone is just constantly fretting over the death of the humanities.
Hmm.
And people have been talking about the death of humanities for what, 60 plus years now? And yes, there's been a marked decline in certain respects, but the humanities are
Yeah.
still around. And to the extent that the humanities are dying, I think it's because everyone keeps pronouncing them dead. Um, there's still,
Yeah.
there's still people studying literature, right? How many people in previous generations were really, we act as though everyone 80 years ago was learning Latin. It's just not true, right? Like people went to school at, all of my grandparents have an eighth grade education. You know, it's not like their generation. People who could continue on in higher education, usually more affluent people, yes, these were people that were learning these skills, but the vast majority, the unwashed masses, which include, people from where I come from, they got the basics and then they went to work in cotton mills, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of this hand wringing, um, I think it's misplaced, let's say, or exaggerated.
So I want to come back to this idea of the death of the humanities in general and what role, if any, will AI play in it. Because that's another aspect of this conversation that directly relates to us, particularly. Um, I'm curious to know, like, this is pure speculation at this point because we really have no idea. I mean, the technology in its current form was just released like a couple of weeks ago. So,
It's
we haven't even
interesting that
really, yeah.
this is interestingly dovetailed with. I just want to mention this before I forget it.
Hmm.
AI generated art
Yeah.
has also come on the scene really quickly, and now I'm sure is putting a lot of artists out of commission. I think that has some real. I think that the real issue is not whether or not this uh, fails to in the academy. There are workarounds in the academy, right? So you don't have a research paper at the end of the semester. Big deal. You just have long form, uh, essay questions in a testing setting where you can't readily access a bot.
Right.
Kind of problem solved, right? Yeah, you
Hmm.
don't get the full. You can have students research over the course of the semester, and then you have to write what you write in class. It'll be less polished than a traditional paper, but if your real goal is just to avoid students using a bot, I mean, it doesn't seem like that big a deal. The issue for me is when anyone, are people going to use this to write novels to sell, right?
Yeah, they will.
And put novelists out of business, or I don't see that as a democratizing. Just like I don't see
Yeah.
AI generated art as democratizing art. I see you are legitimately taking food out of the mouth of artists. Um,
Hmm.
so in that respect, I think there's more of a potential impact. Um,
Yeah. So my concern is like in general, like I agree with that. Especially, well, here's my issue. It's like to a certain extent, yes. If we're talking about um, My major concern here is online education because I
Yeah.
teach fully online. Now, at the high school I teach at, it's not really a problem because we have Zoom classrooms and we meet in the Zoom on the Zoom link like you would meet in a regular classroom. So I can do things like Socratic discussion. I can do things like oral presentations. That's not like I can modify. It's not going to have that big of an impact on that sort of learning environment. Where it is going to have an impact is so for the college classes I teach online. And college education is about there's there's a couple of decades lag in college pedagogy in general. Like I said
Yeah.
before, if you were to remove a student from a 21st century classroom and place them in a early 20th century classroom, the only difference is going to be like technology. It's basically going to be taught the exact same way with a lecturer standing up in front of the room telling everybody like vomiting out all the knowledge in their head or leading through a
Yeah.
particular text, like reading stuff together. Like teaching itself hasn't really changed all that much. And I say that to say that online education is a relatively new thing and that it's happened really over the past like 15 years or so. But as an online instructor, I have kind of two options. One is I can have the students take multiple choice tests to test them on the knowledge that was being taught in the class. That's problematic for obvious reasons, right? Because
Yeah.
Google's been around since online education's been
Oh, yeah.
around. And so it's really easy. And there's no way, we don't really have a technology to monitor that. We have technology that will limit
But not
like how
just
many
that, but if you
tabs.
have a study guide,
Right.
one student will create, um, what do you call it? They'll create the flashcards, and then everyone in the classroom can just access them online. I mean,
Exactly.
there's no way to police it in an
Right.
online space.
Yeah. So that's one option, which has its obvious downfalls. The other option, my solution for like the past 5 years or so, has been like mini, like short responses, which goes around the multiple choice test problem. But now I have this problem, and the reason why online college classes in particular are problematic for this is because colleges, like a really big state school, isn't going to change how they structure an online class. They're going to dump as
No, they
many
can't.
students as they can. They're going to try to get as many people through as fast as possible. And so you as an instructor, you're basically limited to those two options because you can't schedule like one-on-ones for that person to come talk to you. Like it's just not going to happen.
Well, that's the issue. Honestly, there are unrealistic expectations. I can say this because I've taught at state university, um, and no shade on state colleges, but as an adjunct,
Mm-hmm.
I would usually be teaching at two, sometimes three colleges to make ends meet because I was living in California. It's very expensive there. Um, and so you're teaching 4 or 5 classes a semester at a state school. You wind up with, I would have on average 300, 400 students
Right.
because as adjuncts, you tend to teach maybe one upper level class where the cap, which some people have trouble filling a class, but I never had that problem. And the smallest class I ever taught had 25 students in it. So I would have some classes um, that would have 65 students in them, one
Yeah.
class,
Yeah.
and then you're expected to. You can't just do tests. Like the administration wants you to offer writing assignments, and 3 or 4 page assignments are considered not rigorous in a humanities class. Like you'll get in trouble for having that. So you're expected to have, you know, 4 or 5 classes, 300 to 400 students, write a 10 to 15 page research paper
Yeah.
in addition to exams over the course of the semester. Like this physically not possible to read that and to lecture and to, sleep and eat. And so what you end up doing, or at least what I ended up doing, is in my experience, maybe I'm wrong, maybe other people have other experience. In my experience, you can read a page and a half of an exam of an essay, and you can pretty well determine what the rest of the essay is going to be like. Um, and so already, just the mechanisms for assessing at a university, because we the image that a lot of people who have never been to college or have went to college many years ago, or maybe were privileged enough to go to a small private liberal arts college where they had classes with six other people, and they went to dinner with the professor or whatever. That's
Mm,
not how college is now. It's you have office hours. You can fit a few students in, but by and large, the idea that a professor is reading line by line, making detailed notes and suggestions, it's physically not possible.
right.
Um, and so you're already in a situation where students aren't getting the feedback they need anyway. So, absent that, I don't know how students are supposed to either improve that skill or even be measured on that skill in that setting. So, if the college essay goes away, I don't see it as much different than the current situation, which is not tenable.
Right.
Frankly, we have too many people in these classes. The American college system is a conveyor belt. The way that it's currently structured, um, it's rife with problems. And so to act as though this is destroying the sanctity of the college classroom, well,
Uh,
if you're in a class with 50 other students, I mean, you're not exactly getting a professor's attention anyway.
right.
Um,
No, I would, yeah, 100% agree with that. So there's like a level of pomp that surrounds college and college education. I don't think there's, yeah, I don't think there's anything holy about paying someone under minimum wage to do work that's like menial and demeaning and issuing them these contracts. I'm talking about adjunct professors here, by the way, for
yeah.
those of you not in
Well,
the
here's the
know.
thing. Yeah, the thing is, the situation in undergraduate is vastly different. If you are in a upper level master's program or in a PhD program, you do get that one on one. You do get that attention, and
Right,
your ability to BS your way through or to use bots is gonna it's not gonna
right,
cut it.
right.
And this is where we get into the people who go into those programs are the people that are disinclined to use bots anyway.
Exactly. Yeah,
So it's self selective, right? The people who are going to be high achieving, that is, high achieving in the humanities, the people who are interested in humanities in the first place and who are going to go on, move forward in the humanities in an academic setting, are the very people who are not going to be interested in using this, at least not as a primary driver. You're not going to get into a competitive master's program using bots to write your essay.
right.
Um, what this will be used for, as you said, is low achieving or mediocre students
Uninterested.
who will uninterested. These are people that are getting a college degree by and large because they have to get a college degree because our society dictates it. And it's, uh, I mean, these aren't people who are going to be reading Moby Dick for fun anyway.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
don't mean that in a demeaning way. I
Right.
mean, because people have interests. There's a certain kind of person who, a certain strange person like you and me, you know, who are going to pick up Dostoevsky just because.
Yeah. I
You know,
still wouldn't pick up I'll do the selective readings of Dostoevsky, but like even then,
yeah. The point is like not everyone. You know, I have a book on ancient Ugaritic for fun, right? And that doesn't mean that I'm an especially anything. It just means that I have a very niche set of interests.
Yeah,
And most people couldn't be bothered, right?
right.
Uh, and and I can't say that there's anything necessarily wrong with it. People have their interests, you know. Watching a football game is like watching paint dry for me. I'm just not interested, and I respect that other people feel the same way about many of the things I care about. So,
Yeah, yeah, and fair enough. That's why I think what's really problematic about this. So let me use this as a kind of a transition point, and I want to get your thoughts about this because this is what I find especially concerning about this. Like like I said before, for my high school students, like this isn't there's easy workarounds to this. I can easily imagine myself using this as a tool for like writing better and as like a springboard for creative writing as well. Um, what concerns me about this, so within the American college system, especially, and this has been happening for a long time, and I think the chat bots are just another thing in a long line of issues that have been happening in the American collegiate system for decades. But what we've seen happen, especially in the 21st century, has been a dramatic decline in enrollment in humanities programs across the board. Um, English, history, philosophy, um, art history, take your pick. It doesn't matter. And let me just, I'm not saying that these things should be there or we can come back to this, but we've seen a dramatic decline, especially over the past 20 years in enrollment in these disciplines. To the extent that when I attend a department meeting at a college level, they're asking instructors to find people in your intro classes to enroll in the program, or else we're facing budget cuts. Like this is a very real world, like this just happened to me like not too long ago type of situation. My concern is that this sort of technology will further fuel that fire
right.
because high level administrators at these big colleges really only care about like results and a very strict understanding of that meaning of that word. And if a tool comes along that undermines one of the basic things that the humanities has going for it, which is the teaching of reading and writing, critical reading and writing, I'm afraid of how they might interpret that.
Yeah, I think so much of this, again, though, is self fulfilling because when you constantly beat the drum that the humanities are dying, good luck getting further enrollment, right? I think that the real issue, it's not like people have ceased being interested in these things. It's that we live in an economic system where if you don't get a high paying job, you will starve.
Right.
And we have consistently made college about career advancement.
Yeah.
And there's just no career advancement for studying, 14th century Italian literature. Not that there wouldn't be people interested in it if, it didn't cost $100,000 to get a degree. The problem is really just the fact that we have made America, this is particularly a problem in America, where we have made college a business. And then,
Yeah.
we treat the students both as customers and product. And, the teachers are like the machines that turn them out.
Hmm.
And machines are expendable, or, they can be replaced. They can be further automated. The point is, the issue is the structure. And frankly, the entire American education system, now we're getting to real apocalyptic thing. I don't see how it's not facing collapse,
Mm.
because it can't continue on like this.
Talking about the college
Student,
system, or like,
the entire collegiate system,
yeah, yeah,
we're forcing everyone to go get STEM degrees, right? Because supposedly that's where all the jobs are. Okay. Well, what happens when automation gets rid of those jobs, or just, everyone can't be in healthcare and engineering.
right,
It just can't be. And so once the market is saturated and pay goes down for those jobs, why get a college degree? You already see, you know, the right wingers already think that college is a sham, which, fair enough, a lot of it is.
yeah,
Um, but they also see it as like, a system of left wing indoctrination, which we don't have time to get into all that nonsense. But the point is, a certain part of the electorate is starting to see college as not a fair deal. At the same time, in which it's expected now, no matter what you do. My brother works in a factory and he has managerial experience, but he can't advance to a managerial job at the company he works for because he doesn't have a college degree. He has a high school diploma. Um, and even though he has managerial experience, he has people who are 10 years younger than him getting manager jobs with no managerial experience because they have a 4-year degree in food science, even though it's not a relevant degree. Like, it's a silly system. The
hmm,
America has a very silly relationship with higher education.
yeah,
We don't see any inherent value in education in America. We see it as, again, career advancement, and then we don't much care what you get a degree in as long as you have a degree. So it's all about just a pay for credentialing system, and at a certain point, people will just not see a return on that investment, as especially as college keeps getting more and more expensive. You have 20, 30 year olds that have 40, 50, 60, upwards of 100, 200, $300,000 in debt, and they're just not
yeah,
going to recoup that money no matter what the pay is. So I
yeah,
just don't see how we can continue on like this. And so when people talk about the death of the humanities, it's really talking about people aren't enrolling. Well, why aren't they enrolling? Because the humanities is not doesn't have any inherent value, or because people aren't interested in it, or is it really just because people don't want to go into massive debt to not get
yeah,
a job? I mean,
right.
like, what would be the point?
So, if you have anything else to add to that sort of general topic, I'm more than happy to keep talking about it. But I wanted to shift gears to a possibly even more apocalyptic question claim.
Well, so just so I can beat the drum that I
Yeah,
always beat, which is to say that the problem and the death of the humanities isn't going to be brought about by AI. The death of humanities is brought about by capitalism.
there we go. So,
Capitalism has killed the humanities, not AI.
yeah, 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 and I think we should return to this one day because, yeah, the entire direction the collegiate system's going is a topic that I would like to unpack a little bit more. So my my next question relates to I can't remember if we met in this class or not, but do you remember the uh, Dr. Kravchik? Was that who it was that taught the theology and technology class?
Yes.
Yeah. So we read a I don't know if he's a philosopher. I think he could just be a I'm not sure what his academic background in, but do you remember that we read the article and we read a selection from a book that he wrote called The Shallows. Do you remember that article we read by Nicholas Carr called Is Google Making Us Dumber?
Yeah, I remember.
So Carr has this question with respect to technology, and it's a similar sort of question that I want to ask here. And it might be, well, it's not a might. It's way too premature to ask this question. But this was a similar sentiments brought up in the end of high school English, the essay that I referenced by Daniel Herman, where he asked this question towards the end of the essay about kind of what purpose writing plays in the education curriculum and the value of writing for the humanities, the value of writing to justify colleges and K through 12 requiring humanities classes and requiring people to take the humanities classes. And he says that the introduction of this chatbot raises a more existential question, which is this sort of thing still worth doing? Is the teaching of basic writing going to be still worth doing? And so my question, kind of building off of that, kind of taking Carr's approach. So Carr makes this claim that the advent of search engine technology like Google, that there's a loss in our critical thinking ability that has taken place as a result of us using this technology. So my question is, what, if anything, will we lose with this? Like, should we be optimistic to say that, like, well, we could get critical thinking from other avenues and we can develop like good argumentation habits from other avenues? Or is it like something like fundamental to what makes us unique and special as a species, and all that we've accomplished is going to be lost with the downfall of the teaching of writing as a form of communication?
I don't think so. Now, here's the thing. The world as we know it is always passing away.
Mm-hmm.
Like what we value, like what you and I value as, rough, two individuals from the same, similar culture, roughly the same age, the things that we value are not going to be valued by the next generation.
Yeah.
And we will experience that as a significant loss. And one of the things which, you know, people struggle with as they get older is will we be able to instill the values, the things that we imbue value into in the next generation? Will they continue on? Will they care about the things that we care about? And so when stuff comes along like this, it's existentially concerning because we're like, will the generations that come after us be able to understand us and interpret the world in the same way we did? Biologically, I don't think there's any evidence that Google is making us dumber as a species. We will lose certain capacities, but we lose these things all the time. So, for example, there was, go back to Socrates, there was a real concern in a oral culture
Yep.
that writing was going to make us lose something fundamentally human. And has the transition from an oral culture to a written culture changed us as a species? Well, maybe in certain respects. But so, for example, the innate capacity of a human being for memory is really extraordinary. You know, The Homeric legends were communicated orally for hundreds of years before they were ever written down. Um, there are in oral cultures today, there are children, small children, who can recite the entire Quran, right? The
Yeah.
human capacity for memory is really extraordinary. But in a written culture, we don't put emphasis on that any longer. And so we lose the capacity. You probably remember phone numbers from when you were a kid.
Hmm.
You don't remember recent phone numbers, more than likely, because you don't have to. But that capacity is used in other domains, right? We change ultimately. I don't
Yeah.
think that we necessarily have to see that as a decline, except that we experience a loss in culture. We experience it though, right?
Right.
It's a loss for us. Will the next generation see it that way? Who are we to judge, right? At a certain point, you just become a, cantankerous older person saying that I don't like the direction that things are going in. There will always be there will always be a certain section of society that finds value in um, the things that we're talking about, and there will be people that won't.
Right. Ray, you joined in the last 15 minutes of the stream.
I'm sorry, guys.
No, it's all good. So, Ray, I'll ask you the. Go ahead, Rick, Jared.
I was going to say, was Avatar so important?
It was when the tickets were pre-purchased by your
Right,
lovely wife, right?
of
So
course. So, Ray, I'll ask you the question I just asked Jared, which was pretty convoluted and kind of all over the place. But we started off with kind of the practical implications of the chatbot and what it means for things like in terms of like assessing essays and what sort of students this is going to impact most and how this will impact like classes, intro level classes, stuff like that. And we kind of moved on to more like existential questions. And the bigger question that I asked was, I don't know if you remember from when we took the theology and technology class with Kraftchick way back when in our Emory days, but we read an article and a selection from books from a I don't know if he's a philosopher. I don't know what his background is. Named Nicholas Carr, who wrote a book called The Shallows, and who kind of got internet famous for an article he wrote called "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" But Kraftcheck's big thing, not Kraftcheck's, Carr's big thing was that the introduction of certain technology like Google had somehow diminished our capacity for critical thinking, and that the widespread use of this technology, figuratively speaking, was like we lost something with the adaptation of this technology. And there's a similar claim made by Daniel Herman, who wrote the essay "The End of High School English," which has been making its rounds on social media lately with respect to the AI chat.
yeah,
And he says a similar thing, like with respect to writing an essay, the ability to write an essay. And his question is like, is this still worth doing? Like, is this still a skill that's valuable? So, is there something that's? Do you think there'll be something that's lost with the widespread utilization of this technology? Is there going to be something lost from not having students focus on like how to write and how to present an argument in written format?
I mean, I don't know if I would say that um, I'm not convinced that the technology is going to. I think it will change things. I don't think it makes the skill set irrelevant. If anything, it makes it more valuable, right? It makes it more of a rarity, sort of a scarcity. I mean, the more people who decide to depend on this type of technology, the more, scarce and valuable the ability to do it yourself becomes. If you just think of it in those terms, which is kind of like a economic sense of the idea. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not overly concerned about the widespread use of it. I think, there are ways to avoid, there was obviously there are other, instances where people utilize this technology and recognize that there are ways to kind of basically discourage the use of it. I'm not convinced. I don't think it's going to be, I mean, maybe in 10, 20 years, it'll become a massive issue for plagiarism, but there's always ways to, as soon as somebody figures out, how to do this, there'll be some, type of teacher software that allows us to reverse read the algorithm in the language, whatever, something like that. And essentially it'll say this was in large part created by some machine AI. And then you just fail the student in terms of teaching, or, like they get in trouble. I mean, that's just the reality. I think that there could be some really interesting ways where this is used as a sort of like dictation, like a sophisticated form of dictation and just ideation, where you're utilizing this algorithm to organize and cache ideas, and then through an editorial process sort of reshape and remake and rewrite. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like a personal interlocutor to some extent. I think that would be personally interesting in terms of using it. But I'm not convinced that it makes the skill relevant.
One of the articles I read said, well, the bot can only do certain things. And if you ask it to compare Moby Dick with, Oliver Twist, it's cobbling together a lot of information from the thousands of essays that have been written on those two works. But if you specialize it, it gets harder to utilize with, like, in other words, you get convincing results when you use the more general the information is.
Yeah.
And so one of the articles I read, the author saying, well, you could use this as a teacher. You could use this as a way of actually checking your prompts. So if you can plug in your prompt to the AI, if it can spit out a convincing essay, then just edit the prompt until it can.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that it is so good, the prompts that I've read, I have not attempted to use it yet, but I've read examples, posted online by other people, and I would never say that they're really that great. I mean, they're super general. It's not capable of really honing in on concreteness. It kind of reminds me of the vague bullshitting you get from a student who clearly hasn't prepared or
spent time working. This is what we were talking about, though. Like, it's going to replace like someone in a competitive master's program or PhD program, but it can generate things which are as good as, an undergraduate. This is something. Yeah. I did use the chat just a little while ago, and let me tell you what I actually put in here, and then I'll read its response just for humor. I asked it, will ChatGPT be the end of the humanities? And this is what the bot generated. It says, it is unlikely that ChatGPT or any other artificial intelligence system will be the end of the humanities. While AI systems can perform certain tasks efficiently and accurately, they do not have the ability to fully replicate the complex and nuanced nature of human thought and understanding. The humanities, which include disciplines such as literature, philosophy, and history, are concerned with the study of human culture and experience. They provide a way for us to understand and interpret the world around us and to reflect on our values, beliefs, and experiences. AI systems, on the other hand, are designed to perform specific tasks and can only do what they have been trained to do. They do not have the capacity for critical thinking, creativity, or self reflection in the same way that humans do. As such, it's unlikely that AI systems will be able to fully replace the role of the humanities in our lives. So that's what the bot said.
Yeah, and so Ray, this is my big critique. Throw in like 2 references. That's like a solid B final essay for an intro to philosophy class.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the real concern is that not that a professor who has sufficient time and interest couldn't read a response like that and eventually pick it apart and say it's probably a bot. The issue is when you have a professor who is pressed for time, who has too
Yes.
many essays to read already,
Yeah.
who does not have time. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
it's going to fly under the radar.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, if it's an indictment of anything, it's not an indictment of where education is going. It's an indictment of the lack of resources and, that teachers themselves have overpopulating classrooms, overloading teachers with classes. I mean, it's just that I don't know. I think that there are plenty of ways in classroom design that you can avoid things like this and keep things like this to be low impact. I personally think that there will be plenty of English teachers and lit teachers who probably utilize it in class as a teaching tool.
Yep.
Like, why does this bot write better than you, Jody? Let's talk about
Wow.
Talk about how you suck.
let's
It is.
analyze why such good prose, right? And then let's talk about its limitations and try and see, it's that kind of thing. It's like,
Yeah.
there's creative ways that the people who write about this and like, as a bellwether for the end of the humanities are just doing clickbait. That's it. Simple as that. You ever read anything like that?
What are we doing, Ray?
I made a very clickbait title, but yeah.
Well, we do clickbait too, but we're not the New York Times or the Atlantic or whoever else is doing this. We're just some schmarmy ass philosophers who do this on YouTube. So I feel like we can justifiably do clickbait. We're not an
I wonder how many
people
I wonder
depend
how
on
many YouTube essayists will utilize this as a shortcut. Write me a video essay on this topic. No research involved.
I don't know. I don't. I mean, maybe it could happen. I doubt that they'd be very successful. I don't think it's going to impact. It's not going to change the good writers who float to the surface, so to speak.
Right.
But I do think it could be an interesting tool for creative writing. I mean, it could be, an interesting type of tool to leverage as, early stages of writing something, just to like get ideas and prose flowing, and then you just edit, rewrite, or keep rehashing the prompt until you get something. I mean, I think that's a very interesting approach that could spurn on interesting creativity. But I don't think it's necessarily going to be that much better than any other form or approach to do the same thing. It's just a different way. It could be fun for people who write, to try it.
So yeah, let's kind of get our final thoughts here. Do you, and as clickbaity as possible, do you think chat programs like this, bots like this, signal the end of the humanities, broadly speaking, the end of a certain way of teaching, maybe? Or is it just another kind of drop in the bucket? And I will say that just to give a shout out to a colleague of mine, Darren, that made me aware of this. There's already a detector for this, similar to a plagiarism detector. It's
Yeah.
called Hugging Face. For what it's worth, for any educators that might be listening to this, it'll give you a percentage of the likelihood that it was written by a bot. Um, anyway,
Interesting.
so yeah, what exactly, what sort of impact? Let's do again pure speculation because it's been out for a couple of weeks, so who the hell knows? But what sort of impact do you think this is going to have on the humanities, on writing, on education, if any? Jared?
Um, well, first let me preface this by saying, I mean, I'm a Luddite. I don't like technology. I am not, cutting edge when it comes to technology. I'm a cantankerous old fart when it comes to stuff like this. That said, I just don't see this as the end of anything. I do think, as you said, it creates all sorts of problems for the current situation of the humanities within, the American education system, which has been so devastated by capitalism. I think that it does create potential problems in justifying the humanities to people who are already disinclined to see value in it. But ultimately, I don't think that it's the end of anything. Um, it's just it's another thing you as a teacher have to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, it's no different than like Spark Notes and stuff. There are plenty of times when I attempted to use Spark Note crap like that in high school and early college, and it didn't help much. I mean, you know, there will be a select group of people who will really try and utilize it to get ahead. I doubt it will help them much beyond what they'll probably spend as much time thinking through the proper prompt to get it to write something for them as it would take them to write it. Uh, and they'll probably get
That's
the
the
same
thing
grade.
is, yeah, that's the thing is, in order, what one thing that these teachers who are putting in the prompts and then being shocked by the results of how good they are is how good is your prompt?
Yeah.
Um, like if you're putting in a pretty detailed prompt, right, which gets at some of the main concerns of the topic at hand, then you already are putting into the bot a high level of. If you take a student who really just cannot stitch together a coherent thought, I've read essays, and I'm sure you guys have as well, where I cannot make head or tail of what the person is trying to say. I don't know what they think they're trying to say. It's a word salad. It makes absolutely no sense. And I imagine if they were to try to put a description into a bot, they would only be so successful.
Yeah. I mean, what it will ultimately be used for is it will get, these types of technologies will eventually go off the market. They'll be behind a payment wall, and companies will use them to write summary reports of 10,000 reviews of some product they've been selling to see where
Yeah.
people's sentiment lies. I mean, that's what it'll boil down to. I mean, it won't have
I,
that great an impact on education. Not the good ones. A good one will be put behind a paywall and somebody will have to pay to use it. That's what'll happen for sure.
yeah.
We live in a capitalist world, so that's going to happen.
I do think it's going to be it'll be less of a problem for people who are literate in technology. It's going to be real. It's going to be a struggle. If you've been teaching for 40 years, this is one more thing you have to deal with, and it might just be a bridge too far. Like you just can't deal with it. I think younger teachers, or not to put too much off on older teachers. A lot of them are probably better at technology than I am. I think it comes down to how creative are you and how willing are you to get around it, right?
Yeah.
Because as I said, we've already generated a couple of strategies for bypassing at least most of it, right? So you just have to change tactics. Will you be able to eliminate it completely? Probably not. But at the end of the day, will it matter that much? I just don't see where it will. Will you get, I mean, you can think about this now. How many students on average are cheating in your class? Will you catch them all? Probably not. And, if they eke by, they'll get caught eventually, right? Or they get a degree, and what does it matter? At the end of the day, really, what does it
Yeah.
matter?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that'll be what most teachers probably do. They'll just be like, I mean, whatever. I'm here to grade papers and teach. If they don't want to learn, that's on them.
Right.
Cheating's
That's
a
always been
title.
my thing. Like, I mean, not wrong, but that's the thing is like if we're honest, grading is stupid. I mean, real education has never been uh, accessible in these ways. It's only because of the structure of the system that we have to create these gradations. If money wasn't involved, and in the abstract, if college was really this sanctuary of higher learning that we often pretended it is, then things like grades just would not matter.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, are you imbuing people with an interest to become lifelong learners? And does that have value in and of itself? I think there's a real chasm between the way we treat education and the way that education actually functions.
Yeah.
And the way that we would want education to work in our ideal socialist society versus how it functions in their capitalist hellscape.
Yeah. And if it was really the bastion of, and I said this earlier, if it was really the bastion of learning and idealism that we talked about, you'd also pay adjuncts a livable wage, but different subject for a different day.
You wouldn't even have adjuncts.
Right.
It wouldn't be adjuncts. I mean,
There wouldn't be adjuncts.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for stopping by. We might have to do a part 2 of this, and if anybody's interested, we could also do an episode talking about the ins and outs of what education looks like, being employed by these systems as teachers looks like, or not being employed by these systems as teachers looks like, and how horrible the state of Georgia is with respect to adjuncts. Yeah, we could talk about that sort of thing. Yeah, specifically Georgia.
It's really just right to work states, which is a euphemism for anti-union states.
Oh yeah, don't get me started. It's ridiculous. It's horrible. Thanks everyone in the chat for stopping by. I might do a separate video on this. Jared, Raymond, thank you both for stopping by, taking time out of your day. I'll see you all later. Appreciate it.